Hello and welcome everyone back to Enterprise Blockchain Week. We are right now in day number 5. What is Enterprise Blockchain Week? Enterprise Blockchain Week is an event brought to you by Access Blockchain Association of Malaysia, along with its many media partners, including Bitcoin Malaysia, Blocklime, TalkChain, ETH Grenade, App Media, DeFi Singapore, and Imperium Universe. The Enterprise Blockchain Week is part of a larger event called Malaysia Blockchain Month, 6 entire weeks of events. And it's very simple. Every single day for just 1 hour from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m., Monday to Friday, we bring you a new entertaining and educational content. Every single week is a different theme. On week number 1, we covered the progress and the developments in terms of adoption in Malaysia. Week number 2, we talked everything in DeFi. Week number 3, NFTs. And now we are in day number 5 of week number 4 as we discuss enterprise blockchains. Week number 5, we are having a lot of developer boot camps to train up the skills in the country as well as the region in Southeast Asia. And we're ending Malaysia Blockchain Month with week number 6, a 2-day conference called Ignite. Wow, 6 weeks of events. Why are we doing this? Because as an association, our role and mission is to grow the industry. What kind of industry are we talking about? An industry where digital assets live on the internet and they are secured by decentralized networks called blockchains and other distributed ledger technologies. If you combine all of them up, this year in particular was very interesting because in January, it hit $1 trillion for the first time ever. It took 12 years for this industry to hit this milestone. But guess what? Just only 9 months in, because we're right now in September, we're already at $2 trillion industry. So the question is, are you able to capture, the opportunities, the career, build a career in this fast growing industry? So this week we are talking about enterprise blockchains. We had a long line of special guests earlier this week. What have we learned so far? Well, number one, from all the presentations that have been shown so far, we learned that you don't need a token for consensus. What you have seen are a lot of use cases built on AntChain to administer vaccine, Hyperledger. I particularly like the case study where they reduced the traceability of its food in Walmart from 7 days to 2.2 seconds. Quorum being able to trace, the beans all the way to the cup, in Starbucks. And R3 Coda reducing the reconciliation time between the banks. I think 91% of Italian banks, were part of this experiment, and they reduced it from 50 days to less than 1 day. So a lot of this, adoption can happen as long as people come together and they are willing to create this trusted environment to solve problems together. So today we have a very special guest. He to introduce us to another protocol called Fluence Protocol. What is Fluence Protocol? It is another open platform where people are able to compose applications in a decentralized network. And if you are building on this, you can potentially also be rewarded, based on how much the usage, people are using what you have built. Uh, Something that picked up in my radar as well is that Fluence is also one of the sponsors at the Gitcoin Hackathon, which is happening right now between September 8th to 29th. Gitcoin is an amazing platform, to build, to get funding, to support open source development. We get to learn a lot more later with Tom. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Tom, to join us, and share with us more about Fluence Protocol. Hey, Tom,
Hey,
thanks for
Jason,
being
thank
here.
you. Great to be
So,
here again. Really appreciate it.
so Tom is
Um,
not a stranger, and he's been here, last year. How are you doing?
Doing well, doing well. Thank you.
So a lot of things have been happening, in the last 1 year. Before you go into, you know, to share with us about Fluence, can you share with us what have you been up to in the last 1 year, since, and how did you, arrive, at Fluence?
Certainly. So, appreciate being back on here again. I was on here before with my Hedera hat on, and that's a protocol that I helped found, and it was great to kind of tell your audience a lot about Hedera. That continues to be a big success, and they had a 2-year anniversary of open access just yesterday with a lot of great technological updates and the announcement of a multi-billion-dollar funding for a foundation to advance the interests of the protocol. So I'm still very supportive and excited about the advancements that Hedera is making, which I think is undoubtedly the leader in the enterprise space. And so happy to discuss that or take questions on it. But after leaving Hedera, I was introduced to the team at Fluence Labs by an investor I had met. And this wasn't a current investor of Hedera, but said that the Fluence team was the most technically advanced team that he knew. And is a very kind of technical investor. And he thought I should, should link up with them because they were building something really interesting. And so joined them initially as an advisor and then as a co-founder, pretty quickly upon leaving Hedera. I've been working with them since late 2019, I think it was, and really excited for what we're doing. The other thing that I'm doing, I think it's going to be kind of official today, but joining the board of a company called Stronghold Digital Mining, which has filed its S1 to go public in the US. And this is a Bitcoin miner, which basically is classified as a tier 2 renewable. So it cleans up waste coal deposits that have kind of littered, particularly the state of Pennsylvania. And so it mines Bitcoin at about $3,000 a Bitcoin, and has incredibly low cost of power. And I think it's actually doing terrific things for the environment. And that's worth people always talk about Bitcoin being negative in terms of energy usage and the high energy use. But what I think is the less common narrative is that because Bitcoin is effectively can be deployed anywhere and monetize energy anywhere, it actually can lead to incredibly positive environmental outcomes. And if it wasn't being used in this situation, these waste coal deposits would continue to pollute the environment for another 200 years, leach into groundwater, et cetera. And so this is just one example of where energy use of Bitcoin can be deployed in really positive ways.
I love it. Okay. So much things have happened, okay, in the last 1 year. It's quite amazing. I think this pandemic in a way is also kind of like a black hole, right? I haven't seen you for like a year, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot more, okay, stories that we can go into later. But for now, can you share with us a little bit, okay, about Fluence?
Well, I will, but one other thing, Jason, just I wanted to just pick one other point. You mentioned that the growth of 1 trillion to 2 trillion, and I just think that it's. I want to just put that in context for a second. If you consider, and I certainly do, that blockchain is as powerful as in innovation as the internet was, maybe even greater. um, the value created by the internet is measured in the tens or even hundreds of trillions of dollars. And so we're looking at 1 to 2 and saying that's a big number, and it is. But the top 10 internet companies alone are 10 or 11 trillion dollars, right? And the whole market cap of the internet world is multiples of that. And so the reason that Hedera has been successful, of course, but the reason why I'm doubling down in this industry is because I think that leaving Bitcoin aside, which could be 10 trillion by itself, the rest of the industry could be tens of trillions. And so I think that that's just worth people realizing that it doesn't matter where we've been and where the price has been. It matters where it's going to go. And it doesn't mean every project is going to be successful. Everything goes to the moon, but and we will see volatility. But this industry and what it's capable of building and being deployed is, I think, one of the most, no, is the largest value creation potential that has happened in generations. And so I think that is something that people really need to it'd be everyone's interest to kind of really step back and think about how big this can be over the next, decade or two.
So everyone, you did not hear it from me. Okay, I've been, throughout this entire week. Okay, I've been showing you videos. Okay, of Cathy Wood. Okay, showing what the next 5 years. Okay, could be like. Okay, heard it from Tom himself as well. Okay, this is the direction. Okay, of what potentially can happen and why next 5 years. What you do if you're looking. Okay, to build, your career, if you're a university student, okay, looking where should I go, right? This potentially, okay, could be a very good step for all of you. So, without further ado, okay, Tom, let us know, okay, what is Fluence Protocol and why should people be building on it?
Sure. So Fluence, importantly, it's not a layer one. And so let's take a step back here for a second. And so think about where the world has been in the past. And so we started off in a mainframe world, right? We started off with people, Web 1.0, with people and companies and enterprises with mainframes and desktops. And then over time, that migrated to the cloud. And, I'm old enough to remember um, and frankly had invested in early data centers. And back then, people were like, I don't know, it makes more sense to have stuff in my in-house. I don't really want to go to a data center. It's less reliable. I don't control it, etc. Fast forward to today, nobody wants to have it in-house because it's cheaper and more reliable to have in a data center. But that transition wasn't an obvious one at the time. And I'm talking about kind of the late 90s, early 2000s. And obviously AWS and Azure and everyone else has grown dramatically over that period of time. Um, and that's an enormous industry from pretty much nothing. We and I have the view that peer to peer is the next evolution of this. And that's really Web 3.0. And what peer to peer means is that there is no centralized data center. There's no centralized company that is hosting and controlling the applications and the access to the hardware. And I think that the world, what we're seeing more and more of the pressure points that both companies and governments exert on centralized points. And so I think that this Web 3.0 is going to lead to a world where instead of applications being hosted at a centralized company like Amazon, they'll be hosted in a network of computers peer to peer where there is no one company, there is no one ability for that to be turned off or censored. And that is going to lead to terrific things. Also, probably lead to some less good things as well. But we see that as inevitable. And so, why is peer to peer the future? It's because it provides infinite scalability because you can continually add resources to a peer-to-peer network. Anyone can join, anyone can add their computer to it, anyone can add a data center to it. You can add the level of hardware you want, level of reliability you want. You have higher security because it can't go down because it's replicated globally and has better resilience. And so there's no centralized points of failure, no bottlenecks, and that leads to, we think, a just far superior offering for hosting any type of application. And so, why haven't we seen that yet develop? And that's because the computing layer hasn't been possible. And so, right now, we've seen, and everyone's very familiar with the payment level on the payment level peer to peer. That's Bitcoin. It's a wide variety of cryptocurrency solutions that provide decentralized peer-to-peer payments. That's been solved. We also have decentralized storage. That's IPFS. It's Filecoin, Arweave storage. A number of very sophisticated, used, deployed solutions for storage. But what we haven't yet had is a computing layer that works on a peer-to-peer basis natively, and that's what Fluence enables. And so Fluence is this peer-to-peer computing layer that links up and ties into storage and payments that together form the full solution necessary to allow applications to exist and be composed natively peer-to-peer. And this is it's hard to understate the benefit and the power of these three components when put together. And so, what does that mean? Who uses this? Why is it necessary? Well, if we take a look at Web3, for example, the one thing I really want to talk about here is this sort of anti-centralization issues. And this is we probably hear talk, and maybe it's been in your conference or not, but self-sovereign identity, personal data ownership, and messaging. And I think when you think about just messaging for a second, some examples that I think of are related to India, which has put a lot of pressure on WhatsApp to censor individuals and content that had narratives counter to what the government wanted messaged. And so, whenever you have a centralized enterprise or business, you have more and more we have governments looking to exert influence over that. Peer-to-peer messaging basically eliminates that capability of censorship. You also then have self-sovereign identity, which is very important. And when you have self-sovereign identity, you want to make sure that that is also secure and decentralized, and it also permits personal data ownership. And so we think that these are all Web3 kind of ethos, where instead of having your identity, an identity at Amazon, an identity at Facebook, an identity at Google, you have your identity and you just share what you need to share with whom you decide to share it, when you decide to share it. And so that is, we think, basically gives ownership back to individuals and puts the power back in individuals' hands, as opposed to kind of the tech oligopolies world that we live in today. Um, and so, what is a peer-to-peer application platform, which is what Fluence is? And it's basically this computing protocol. As I mentioned, but it's also a programming language that helps build these applications. And so, one of the things that we have that is unique to it is a new language called Aqua, which is the only programming language for peer-to-peer. And this allows the easy composition of applications on the network. And so this allows very fast, very easy creation of native peer-to-peer applications, and there's no other solution, no other language that allows that. And there are languages out there, depending on how technical we want to get, like Rust, that have some of these capabilities. But the issue is, what we see is the interest in having the whole web community be able to compose on this. And so rather than have a Java developer have to learn Rust to do peer-to-peer, we think we have instead, Aqua, far easier and simple to learn. And once you learn it, it makes it far easier to compose than if you were using Rust, as an example. So we think this Aqua language is is a far easier step than forcing anyone into one of the existing languages, which are not fully optimized for peer-to-peer anyway. So that is a key piece of what we have. And so there already are, where Fluence is, we already have some significant groups using and deploying and building on Fluence, which is pretty exciting. And so we're top of mind with a variety of Web3 projects. One of the things that I think is worth mentioning is talking about messaging is, we're working with a self-sovereign identity firm that has 100,000 users in their ecosystem, and we're building a peer-to-peer messaging application and platform on top of Fluence. And so we hope to roll this out to 100,000 users in early Q1. And I think that will be a real demonstration of the capabilities of Fluence. These are the three pillars, which I've talked about a little bit, which is this programming language, this network service. And then what I really want to talk about here, and Jason, you touched on this, is this code creator economy. And so this is actually what I think is really interesting to developers around the world. And that is really a point where you're able to unleash the power of global developers. And so the concept is that any program on Fluence, any kind of module, as we call it, is hosted by any host on Fluence. And so if you author some software, you can put it on Fluence, and via smart contract, you say, okay, I would like to have, X either user or hour or by some metric how you would like to charge for it. And then a host can decide whether or not they will compensate you for that. They either host it or they don't. If they host it, they then will compensate you as per the contract. When a developer decides to use the code offered by any host, they just pay one fee, which is a hosting fee. And so example of this is, if I'm going to use AWS, I will pay them to host my code. That's obvious, right? They'll host the application. Here, if you're going to build on Fluence, you are paying these decentralized community, whichever nodes you choose, to host whatever code you're running. The difference with Fluence is that because of that earlier kind of agreement between the software author and the host, some portion of that revenue flows to the original author of that code. And so what that means is that any user, anyone that uses code based on Fluence, they are paying a hosting fee just like they would on Amazon or anywhere else, but some of that actually goes to the original author. And that we think is a very important innovation because it allows authors anywhere in the world to potentially monetize their code. And we don't think that people are going to be buying boats and planes with this monetization. By nature, it's open source software. So if the fees charged are high, then we expect someone will fork the code, make a small change, and offer it for less, right? So it's going to be small, but it still should be sufficient if the code is used to support family, a business, etc. And so that is not been possible so far. Every other piece of open source software is funded by grants, it's funded by donations, or it's funded by extensive infrastructure of consulting companies or integration companies that monetize kind of enterprise deployments. And that's fine, but that is an enormously complex, those are complex businesses to build and not suitable for 99.9% of developers. And so our view is we think it's incredibly beneficial to open up this world for developers globally to monetize. And they do that, by the way, based on use. If you write something it's not used, it's not going to be monetized. If it's used a lot, it should be monetized, and that is, we think, very fair. And so, and then the next level of this is obviously, when you develop something, you can actually create an NFT of it and actually either sell or share the hosting revenue that you receive. So you can then sort of monetize it even further, which is, I think, also a terrific way to actually take advantage of the NFT technology effectively in a way that is quite tangible and real. And where this leads to, just so we're totally clear, is that this leads, we think, to developers putting a lot of code on Fluence because they will earn as it's used. As that code is on Fluence, that leads to a lot of interest in Fluence. It leads to a lot of people building on Fluence, which leads to revenue to those original people who supplied the code, which leads to more people putting their code on Fluence, which leads to more people using Fluence. So it leads to, we think it creates a very virtuous circle of a terrific amount of code and deployed on Fluence, and then which leads to many more choices and far faster innovation and far more interesting uses, which we think is going to be incredibly hard for centralized clouds to keep up with. We know that centralized clouds always copy open source projects, right? They always copy open source. They always put it up. Amazon does it exactly. The open source, we talked to one of the largest open source projects. And actually, and they think that Amazon monetizes their open source to the level of $1 billion to $2 billion a year. And so we see that happening, and that money just goes straight to Amazon and to some of its shareholders, not to any of the authors of that open source software. And so, but the problem is, or the benefit, the opportunity is that the centralized companies are always more slow in copying, in innovating, and they will always be behind. And so, if we have the global developer community with incented and interested in deploying code, that will just dwarf the ability of any central company to keep up. There'll be no chance for a centralized company to keep up with the innovation and creativity of the global developer community. And so we think that ultimately it won't even be that long before the code on Fluence is very superior, far more variety, and far more with far more solutions possible to anyone who wants to build almost anything. And that, I think, is a really terrific outcome. And I think it also then will lead to the reward of developers wherever they are in the world who write this code which is used, and also to developers and to hosts who want to host this code as well. So it's also a way to monetize any hosting. And an important piece here, which I should mention, is that Fluence is not a blockchain. All right. And so obviously Hedera was layer one. We've talked a lot about blockchain, but Fluence is not a blockchain. It is a peer-to-peer computing and hosting network that has a blockchain attached to it to track usage, but it's not a blockchain. And so what that means is that it is incredibly flexible, allows non-deterministic code, and you can attach and add consensus to something if you want to. But it's far, blockchain community may not love this, but it's far more flexible than just a blockchain based system. And so that also allows for a wide variety of computing resources to be deployed. And so, there may be some applications for which a intermittently unreliable, laptop is possible. And there'll be other, and there could be other, solutions where you need to have a, five nines, deployment of, multiple data center and, instances, and for which it makes sense to pay for that. And that's fine. And the network is flexible to allow for that variety and spectrum of uses. So this is basically it basically allows the peer-to-peer for the whole web stack. And so there's starting at the bottom, there's storage, which is obviously critical. And then there's the blockchain layer, which Fluence allows cross-chain swaps, exchanges, and that is, I think, obviously people can grasp what that is. And then there is the application layer, which is also important for what everyone's day-to-day experiences are. So Fluence actually works as the plumbing between all of these different layers, and for the different components of each of the layers as well. How is this going to work? Well, the Fluence, we're going to have a DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, which will manage the governance and the treasury. And it's going to be about 50% of the coin supply will be to the DAO and the community overall. So it will be decentralized from launch. And the treasury and product roadmap will be controlled by the DAO. And the DAO is going to approve developer programs and distributions. And we're working on kind of finalizing the architecture for that right now. This is basically some of the stuff I've discussed already, but we're basically each one of these three areas: storage and compute, identity messaging, consensus, and reputation. We're in, integration level deployments with companies and protocols in each one of these, names of which you would recognize but are not public yet. So we hope to have announcements on this in the coming months. Um, and we're also going to be seeing the community with grants to 10,000 of the best Web3 developers. And so we'll be looking for kind of the top Web3 projects, and we will be, doing a developer reward to a large number of developers, um, to give them to get them involved in governance from an early level, which we think is going to be, very important to bringing the whole ecosystem on board. Where do we stand? The network for the P2P network is live. Aqua, the programming language, is also live. The documentation is has made great strides, and I encourage everyone to check it out. We're working on a governance token, which we think will launch kind of end of this year. And then we're working the open source rewards, which I spent a lot of time talking about, that we will launch next year. And so that will kind of complete the kind of core functionality of the Fluence protocol. So far we've raised 7 million from some, well-known investors. And it's an interesting structure where, just for everyone to know, we're raising an equity, and then a coin will be issued as a dividend. We think that's the most compliant way to do this and I think compliance, given the current regulatory environment in the US, is particularly important. And then I think just the other founders, just to know, Evgeny and Dmitry, are each over a decade in blockchain and open source. Both went to kind of the top technical university in Russia, Novosibirsk State University. So they have been involved in the space for an incredibly long time. Very sophisticated, and lucky to be partnered with them. And what are we really trying to do here? We're really trying to empower the next wave of internet innovation. And so we've seen the internet overall start to become really centralized in a handful of tech oligopolies. And that, I don't think we've felt that the negative impacts of that yet, but it is inevitable that happens. And so we want to build something here that eases the way for anyone anywhere in the world to build quickly, simply, and cheaply. And then also for people who help that building to be rewarded for doing so. And so, we're obviously fans of from Tim Berners-Lee, and we can't envision exactly what will happen. We can think of decentralized messaging and elements of those lines, but we really want to build Fluence so that those, exactly what Tim says, those who come after us with better imaginations than us have the rails and the kind of infrastructure to be able to create things that we have a difficult time even imagining ourselves. And if you think back to what Tim was building when he put together the internet, I don't think he could have envisioned all of the enormously powerful technology and applications we use today. And we think that, with an open protocol and open peer-to-peer applications, we could have an entire new wave of innovation and incredibly more tailored, specific, open applications that is hard to even conceptualize right now. So find us at fluence.network or Twitter at fluence underscore project. So that those are my formal remarks, and happy to take questions.
Oh my God. Thank you so much, Tom, okay, for that. Um, really, again, I keep using this word, but we've been so lucky to have, these special guests for this week. It's literally a wealth of information. I have so many questions. I do not know where to begin. Thank you for, first giving us a very clear understanding of where the project actually comes and what the problem is trying to solve. You shared with us, okay, the gaps that it's trying to fill, okay, which is the P2P computing gap, the programming language, okay, that users, okay, is easier than languages like Rust. Um, okay, so maybe the first question I'd like to ask, okay, you mentioned earlier and you keep re-emphasizing that it is not a layer one. It's not a layer one. It uses only the blockchain, okay, as a way to track usage of the code that people are building on Fluence. So perhaps the first question is, if it is not a layer one, when people write code on Fluence and this code becomes an NFT, um, is that the NFT that we are familiar with, which is basically the ERC 721 standard? Is it minted on a blockchain?
So um, the answer is yes and no. And so the answer is that that piece is still, we haven't determined what format that will be, whether it's, let me back up. Our governance token will be an ERC20, so that will be on Ethereum. That's the current plan, and so it would make sense for the NFT to as well. But we haven't yet determined that, and I think that ultimately people will be able to use different blockchains should it be relevant. And so I think there's a difference between tracking the code usage. And I think that we're getting into more and more bridges between other blockchains. And so I think that while day one it might need to be on Ethereum, I think that we're certainly interested in having as much flexibility as possible for anyone to be used. And as an example, Hedera just announced some pretty interesting functionality with regard to NFTs yesterday. And so I think there are other protocols that we want to be able to enable. It's just a question of kind of time and ability to roll them out.
Got it. So in the short term, okay, it could be using what it is the most obvious, right? And then, but having the flexibility, okay, to welcome others as well. So, when you mentioned just now, okay, that coders, okay, get to incentivize because these codes are minted as NFTs. You're talking about microtransactions, right? How is that possible in, say, for example, Influence? Because if I remember right, um, tr- microtransactions are currently not possible because transaction fees are uh, extremely high on layer ones. How is that possible?
Well, so first of all, not all layer ones transaction fees. So that's just an aside, but Hedera transaction fees are incredibly low. So Ethereum gas prices are high, and some others may be high as well, but not on all. So that's one thing. Second
Ah,
is, so that's an important piece. I mean, Hedera transaction fees are, a hundredth of a penny or even less. So that is just one thing to have in mind. But the way that and these could be microtransactions, they may not be microtransactions. It all depends on kind of the how the payments are set up. But if we look at this, you create a contract, you want to host your you want to use some code on Fluence. You then have the ability to choose from multiple hosts. You come up with an agreement with them. Maybe you pay them once a month, maybe in advance, maybe it's once a week, maybe it's once a day, maybe it's once a minute, right? So depending on the periodicity, it's probably not going to be once a minute, just because that's just logistically complicated and annoying. Maybe you want to build a smart contract to do that because you think the variability in pricing will go up, will fluctuate dramatically. I don't know, but presumably it's going to start off with a much more standard periodicity. And so that will, I think, make those transactions not micro. And then the question is, what are the transactions, the fee sharing to the ultimate code authors? And again, that those also don't have to happen every second. That probably happens on the same periodicity that the host receives the payment. So if the host is paid once a month, probably pays the software author once a month as well. That's like that chain would be the same. And so whether, and I, there's a wide, depending on kind of the hosting intensity and the scale of the application you're building, it could be micro. I think most of them will not, frankly, be microtransactions because hosting costs real money. And so
right.
we want to enable that, but that's not a I'm hoping that they're not all microtransactions because we want real usage here. But to the extent they are, I think then we'll have to obviously use, either use low fee blockchains or L2s that facilitate that, because it clearly can't be done on a native Ethereum.
Okay, so we have some questions. Okay, the audience, let's take them one by one. How does Fluence differ from Divinity?
How does it differ from what?
Divinity.
So that is a great question. And so the main thing I would say about that, because that shows some real insight into what, and some understanding of some of the comments I made. I think a real difference is around the deterministic um, nature of Dfinity. And so, because Dfinity is based on a blockchain, that means that there's a huge computational overhead, which means Dfinity needs to have, any host on Dfinity has to meet a huge computational hardware requirements, right? So Dfinity needs to approve you as a host. You have to bring a terrific amount of resources to be a host. That's not decentralized in my mind. That's not, open in my mind. And so for us, because we're not deterministic, we're not blockchain based, that opens up the ability for anyone to host. You can join with your laptop, or you can join with a data center, and it's up to a user to determine which level of computation reliability they want to pay for. That's the future. It's not running on just, a couple of approved hosts.
Okay, so another question is also from Harpreet. Is a follow-up question. Why separate the programs to a P2P network with blockchain for record keeping than using a single DLT for itself with machine?
Well, I think the reason, this kind of is a different way of asking a similar question, which is that you don't want this to run on a blockchain because the consensus overhead is so big. So you want to make Fluence protocol the protocol as light as possible, as flexible as possible. And so you want to allow people to involve consensus when they want it, but you don't want to have everything running with consensus overhead, because then we go back to the same problem of having to have very specific hardware requirements. So we think of blockchain, using blockchain as for a particular use, which is tracking and payments, and that's what it's perfect for. It's not meant to be, we don't think, the solution to everything.
Got it. Another question is from Shafiq. Shafiq asks, would it be possible to bridge the contracts into a permission blockchain such as Hyperledger Fabric? Any API ready
Yes,
for development?
I'm not sure what it means by contracts, and so, I don't think I think we sort of, that question sort of misses a little bit of where we are, and so I don't know a right way to answer that question. I guess I'd say the APIs are ready for developers, and so you can go check that out. You can go download it right now. That's available. I guess the reason I'm struggling here is I don't know why you would want to bridge it into it. This is meant to build, build any type of application, and so I don't know, if you're building any type of application, why you would want to bridge into that. If you wanted to, let me phrase this way: if you wanted to have an application, it could build on Fluence. If you then wanted to have consensus from a Hyperledger or from a Fabric, yes, I think you could bridge that piece of it in. So maybe that's the right way to answer that question.
Okay, so we have another question coming from YouTube, okay, which is about the self-sovereign identity messaging. Is there a name, okay, for this P2P messaging service?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. And here's the um um I guess one of the great things though is that once it's built on um on uh on Fluence, then it should be available for other people to go and, use those components and build other ones, and copy them and build other ones with different user interfaces, different features really quickly.
So can you talk a little bit about how this P2P messaging would work with self-sovereign identity? I mean, do I need to create another identity which is self-sovereign, and then is it a separate thing, or does it come into like talk a
Um,
little bit about how it works?
Well, so there's two. I guess there's a couple different components to it there. So one, there's a variety of companies out there that are working on self-sovereign identity solutions, and so
Yeah,
those companies are out there saying, or protocols or projects out there saying, hey, um, we want to enable consumers and individuals to own their identity and only share the pieces of it that they choose
yeah,
with whatever they choose, right? And so that is a whole world of terrific projects out there doing that, working on deployments. As part of that, though, you need to share private keys and you need to communicate. And to date, that communication has happened via messaging, which is centralized. And now it's encrypted, right? And that's fine, but it's still centralized, still could be shut off, et cetera. And so, for a complete alignment, if you have a decentralized self sovereign identity project, you should probably also have with it a decentralized messaging component that allows the sharing of information in a way that is not censorable.
got it. Okay, I'm looking personally. I'm also very looking forward, okay, to that as well. Now, we are running out of time. I want to ask, okay, the last question would be on training. Someone wants to get trained, okay, on building on Fluence. Where does one get started?
Um, um, I guess the best way to go is to go to Fluence .network, and I think that the I guess the best way would be to start with some of our hackathons and look at our documentation. And so there's a lot of documentation out there that can get people started. And then I would look at a couple of our hackathons coming up. And you mentioned the Gitcoin hackathon right now. And you can sort of, that probably is the best place to play with what we're doing. But we're also just yesterday had our first community call where we kind of opened up our one of our weekly kind of team calls to the community and found that to be a great way to answer questions. But I think the documentation we have is the best way to get started. And so you can find that at fluence.network.
All right, awesome. So, documentation here looks really clean. Okay, I think there's a wealth of information here. There are also there's also, okay, a very useful playlist that I found, okay, on YouTube, which allows you to get started, right? So scan the QR code, okay, to get started on Fluence quickly, right? Okay, there are like 4 videos here and immediately how you can actually work on some potential use cases because they have some bounties at the hackathon, okay, that they're doing at Gitcoin that's running right now. So with that, okay, I'd like to thank, okay, Tom. Tom, thanks again for visiting us and spending the last 1 hour to share with us about Fluence.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me again, Jason. Appreciate it.
All right, so that brings the end, okay, to day number 5 of the blockchain enterprise blockchain week. Thank you very much, okay, for staying with us. Do remember to claim your proof of attendance token by scanning this QR code. Also, very that's happening this weekend. This weekend is Mooncake Festival, all right? And our media partner, TalkChain, is organizing a full day event from Saturday 6 p.m. to Sunday 6 p.m. It's going to be happening on Gather Town. There's going to be drops, there's going to be talks, okay? I will be personally attending as well. Scan the QR code right now so that get a ticket in. Ooh, we still have more announcements to make. One is the 2 day conference, okay, that is Ignite happening on week 6. So scan the QR code to register for that right now. The agenda is already out. Okay, you could see that you'll be hearing from various stakeholders and investors like Cradle, like 1337 Ventures. On the second day, you'll be hearing from NFT marketplace, local one, Copentas, right? So scan the QR code to register for the 2 day conference right now. Next Monday, we are starting our blockchain developer week. So there are 3 more seats remaining for the virtual drone tech and blockchain bootcamp that's starting on Monday. So scan the QR code, okay, if you want to be part of this bootcamp. So next week is blockchain developer week. We have an entire agenda, okay, for you. Boot camps, okay, from Monday to Friday. from blockchain bootcamps, Solidity, how to read smart contracts for beginners, the scan, Binance Smart Chain, Hobbies, blockchain, okay, which is Heco block. There's a bootcamp there. There's for Quorum, for Anchain, Tezos. So stay tuned. Okay, I'll see you next week, Monday, 2:30 for the first session, okay, on Blockchain Developer Week. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.